Britain's major galleries house some of the finest collections of art to be found anywhere in the world.
But there are thousands of other artworks we know little about in the collections of smaller institutions. Over 80% of this publicly owned treasure is in storage and often uncatalogued. We don't know the name of the artist, the subject, or when and where they were painted.
The Art UK website was created to shine a light into these shadows and now has over 200,000 paintings online. Using this database, we'll be travelling the country, seeking out potential lost masterpieces.
When we find an interesting painting, I'll investigate the story behind its creation, using a meticulous process of restoration, research, and scientific analysis.
I'll be exploring the world in which these works were created, the social and historical background to the life of the artist, which gives a painting its context. But simply finding a painting is just the beginning of the trail.
This week we've come to Cardiff, the capital city of Wales. We're on the trail of a painting that may be a treasure from the early years of the Italian Renaissance.
There's been a mystery surrounding the picture for over 100 years, but it has a fascinating history involving murder in Medici Florence and secret deals at the shady end of the art market.
And I'll be looking at the extraordinary story of the fabulously wealthy art-collecting sisters who bought the picture and eventually donated it to Cardiff Art Gallery.
They had this extraordinary vision for Wales.
Is our picture a lost masterpiece? Or has it been subject to some very underhand interference?
This is a faked surface.
Oh, don't say that.
What will the verdict be? Our journey begins in the National Museum of Wales, home to Cardiff's Art Gallery.
Today, we're being shown round by Senior Curator Anne Pritchard.
Hi, lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you.
After a trip through some impressive galleries, things are a bit more down to earth when we get to the picture store.
Here we go.
The painting I've come to see is officially described as being by a follower of Sandro Botticelli. In other words, a later copy by another artist. It's a Madonna with a Christ child holding a pomegranate.
I was quite impressed with the image of this picture on Art UK, but in the flesh, my goodness me, parts of it really sing. I think it's absolutely beautiful.
Sandro Botticelli belongs in painting's Premier League. He was working in Florence in the early years of the Italian Renaissance, and his Birth of Venus is now one of the most familiar images in Western art. There are parts of this picture that are so good, I wonder whether it could actually be by Botticelli himself, or at the very least, made in his workshop.
There's lots of mystery going on here, though, because parts of it are really absolutely not up to Botticelli's standard at all. The hands, for example, are very simplistic and stiff, and they look as if they've been sort of traced on by my daughter, who is 4. And yet the quality of the head, goodness me, that's beautiful. And Christ's expression is very good too. And I always find when you've got a picture like this which has manifestly really good bits, at the same time as having really questionably bad bits, well, that often means there's a mystery waiting to be solved. There are lots of questions, though, we need to answer. What's it painted on? To what extent has it been interfered with later on? And am I just being blindly optimistic? How intriguing.
To start answering some of these questions, we moved the painting to the museum conservation studio, where we were joined by Adam Webster, the gallery's chief conservator.
How nice to see it under proper lights.
Adam pointed out some encouraging signs of pentimenti, alterations to the picture that had been made by the original artist.
There are some pentimenti, for example, around his leg here, and this quite intriguing area around the neck here.
I just think she's such a lovely image. Beautiful, don't you think?
I hope that isn't clouding your judgment, Bendor. Are you familiar with the phenomenon of scopophilia?
Oh, God. Oh, it sounds awful. What is it?
It's just the idea that the male gaze is, I guess, clouded by whether it or not it perceives something as beautiful. And if it perceives beauty, then it might afford the object higher value than it's really worth.
I think, actually, it sounds like I'm absolutely guilty because my reaction to this picture, isn't that interesting, from a sort of connoisseurial point of view, is that I think because she's beautiful, it must be a good painting.
See,
so that's it, scopophilia, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's one
You've
of
got all the symptoms.
Oh, no, it sounds like I'm going to get a rash next, by the way you're
I
diagnosing
hope you're
it.
not contagious.
In fact, this painting was owned by a woman, Gwendolyn Davis, and was bequeathed to the Cardiff Museum in 1952. It was part of one of the most important collections of paintings ever given to a UK gallery.
You don't have to spend long browsing these galleries before you realise that this really is a world-class collection of international art, and that the name Gwendolyn Davis comes up frequently as a donor. Her sister Margaret, it seems, was just as generous.
As well as our Botticelli, the Davis sisters gifted over 260 works of art to the National Museum. English landscapes by Gainsborough and Constable, a Mannerist masterpiece from El Greco's studio, and a full roll call of Impressionists, Renoir's La Parisienne and landscapes by Cézanne and Monet.
So who were Gwendolyn and Margaret Davis, these incredibly generous sisters, and where did their money come from?
To answer that question, I've come a few miles along the coast, west of Cardiff, to Barry Docks. It's difficult to believe that this tranquil coastal town was once the busiest coal port in the world. It was opened in 1889 as an alternative to the expensive and congested harbour at Cardiff. Unlike Cardiff, it was not dependent on the tide for access and had its own direct rail link to the South Wales coalfields. By the early 20th century, nearly 20,000 people worked on these wharfs.
And here's the man who built it all, David Davis. Gwendolyn and Margaret were his grandchildren, and with the formidable Davis fortune behind them, they set about creating an art collection to rival any in Britain.
The family were Calvinist Methodists, a uniquely Welsh nonconformist faith, strictly teetotal, and forbidden to do anything on the Sabbath. But on their 25th birthdays, the sisters each inherited more than £50 million in today's money. They began to spread their wings, and art became central to their lives. Travelling across Europe, they visited the great collections and attended art history lectures. But in 1914, the outbreak of the First World War brought a halt to their artistic adventures. Their philanthropic nature saw the sisters travel to France, volunteering in a canteen behind the lines. They remained abroad throughout the hostilities, and their impressionist shopping spree came to a halt.
This was not the end of their artistic journey. While in France, the sisters conceived of a plan to initiate a cultural renaissance at home and to give something back to Wales. Their greatest achievements were yet to come.
Our possible Botticelli has arrived at the London studio of paintings restoration specialist Simon Gillespie.
Voila!
The first task is to remove it from its frame.
What's this label?
All these labels here say Botticelli because when they bought it, there was no doubt it was the real deal. In fact, it was their most important painting.
Really?
And now it's just thought to be a copy.
Ever the optimist, I think the simple wooden panel is already looking promising.
Oh yes, I mean, I'm hearing choirs of angels and everything.
Let's have a closer look. So, here we are.
Simon's eagle eye immediately spots some very odd retouching.
These cracks are actually painted on.
Are they?
Yeah. They're actually scratched into the surface. You see, you look closer.
Oh, fake cracks.
And they've got dirt in them. Even without lenses on, I can see that. This is a faked surface.
Oh, it does say that. Hang on. Well, it's a fake or this bit's a fake?
Certainly that's fake.
Oh, dear.
Is the whole thing fake?
Simon, you start talking about fakes.
Is the whole thing a fake?
Don't say that. Reassure me. Your job is to reassure me.
Okay, so here we've got a nice area of original crack. This is the sort of cracks that you'd expect in a panel of this age.
Right, well, good. That's better.
It needs some scientific backup as to what we are looking at. X-ray will actually show us what damage there is underneath all this overpaint.
Right.
It may even show pentiments of where the artist has changed his mind. Infrared will also be very useful to determine the artist's technique, because we'll be able to see the drawing lines that have been built up.
All right, so we need to shut the kitchen sink at this one.
Yeah, it's very exciting. I mean, there are great parts to it. He knew how to capture beauty.
Simon's list of technical investigations will help unlock the secrets of our painting. And at Art Analysis and Research, the panel is X-rayed and given an infrared scan. In Renaissance Florence, a picture like this would usually have been painted on poplar wood, which unfortunately can't be dated. But we need to confirm as far as possible that the materials match what we know of Botticelli's workshop practice. Dendrochronologist Peter Klein takes a tiny sample of the wood panel for analysis. While we wait for the results of these tests, Adam Webster, the Cardiff Gallery's chief conservator, has come to London to discuss the planned treatment of the painting.
So you've opened up some areas.
Yes. The test that I've carried out here is removing the dirt, yellow varnish, and some of the overpaint.
So this is suspiciously smooth here in your raking light, and then suddenly, we're back to the 15th century.
Yeah.
Adam, the next question for you is, given this background, which we're very sure is what, late 19th century?
I would say it's late 19th century, yeah.
What do we do with it? Is it part of the picture's history, or is it a terrible abomination that should be whipped off?
In a way, although we feel that aesthetically this is not as desirable as the original, it also has its own history. And I think that what we need to do is create a sort of picture of what this surface is showing us, and make a really balanced judgment about what needs to stay and what doesn't stay.
So it seems likely our picture has suffered extensive damage at some point, and someone has tried to rescue the most significant areas, the faces of the Madonna and Child. They certainly look to be very fine indeed, perhaps worthy of Botticelli himself, but much of the rest of the picture has been poorly patched up. But I still have a good feeling about the painting.
Just opening these small areas up, they look a lot better than I was expecting them to.
I was expecting worse.
Yeah.
I was expecting it to be worse than this, yeah.
Oh, I've had him on the phone for hours. Why have you brought me this picture? It's awful.
It may be my scopophilia, but I think the sign of a truly great painter is that ability to capture beauty. And Botticelli could do that supremely well. Sandro Botticelli was born in Florence around 1445, in the early years of the Italian Renaissance, just as the finishing touches were being made to the great dome of the cathedral. But this was also one of the most turbulent periods in the city's history, a time of political intrigue and murderous infighting between the leading Florentine families. Despite this turmoil, Botticelli managed to produce some serenely beautiful work that put the human figure at the center of his art. And the first thing I wanted to do was have a look at his most famous painting, the biggest tourist magnet in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, The Birth of Venus.
Except it doesn't show The Birth of Venus. That title was given to the picture long after Botticelli painted it. What we actually see is the arrival of Venus. She's emerged from the sea, fully formed, and she's been blown towards the land by the wind god, Zephyr. And the title is not the only thing that's wrong about the painting. But look at those waves. Well, they're most curious, aren't they? You might almost be forgiven for thinking that Botticelli had never seen the sea before. What about the landscape? Well, the perspective, that cornerstone of Renaissance art, is frankly all wrong. But in a way, it's everything that's wrong about the picture which helps make it so right. Botticelli would say, perspective schmective. Let's just focus on the important thing about the picture.
This is the first full-length nude in Western painting. But we're so familiar with the image, it's easy to forget this remarkable fact.
And what a beauty she is, as she's so real and alive. You could imagine her on a catwalk today, or on a Hollywood film poster.
Her pose is copied from Greek and Roman statues, and the scene depicted is from the texts of Greek mythology. The rediscovery of this ancient classical culture was firing the imaginations of a new generation of Florence's artists who had previously been restricted to Christian themes.
Now, in academic art history, we're supposed to look at pictures like this and go, what does it mean? Well, I don't think it means anything, really. I think the subject is just an excuse, a fig leaf, to allow Botticelli to paint a full-length nude like this. And the secret of Botticelli's success is that he was able to translate this beauty into his other subjects too.
Transferring this same arresting beauty to a religious subject was just as revolutionary. Botticelli could give an erotic charge to a pagan image like Venus, but he didn't have the same license with the Virgin Mary. This is the Madonna of the pomegranate, and she's every bit as beautiful as the Venus. The pomegranate, which we also have in the Cardiff picture, is a symbol of Christ's suffering, and Mary's mournful gaze shows she knows of the sorrows to come. But if anything, her sadness makes her beauty more powerful.
Recognize her? There's been a great deal of debate over exactly who Botticelli used as his model for the Venus, but I think there's little doubt that he used the same model to at least inspire his Madonnas.
So, how does this help us with the attribution of the Cardiff Madonna?
We can see here what we need to be looking for in a genuine Botticelli. He has a very idiosyncratic way of drawing his features. For example, first he does an underdrawing on the panel, then he paints the flesh tones, and then he redraws the outline on top, which gives you this very hard edge. And often he will then work the line a number of times so that you can see a change in, say, the angle of a leg or a foot.
We can see that here in the line of Christ's leg and the Virgin's cheek, and we've seen exactly the same kind of redrawn outlines in our Cardiff Madonna. For someone who was born around 1445, we know a surprising amount about Alessandro di Mariano, to give Botticelli his full name.
This is the Ognissanti district of Florence. In the mid-1400s, it would have been at the edge of the city, just inside the medieval walls. It's where Botticelli grew up and spent most of his life.
Centered around the cloisters and kitchen gardens of the Franciscan monastery, Ognissanti was a district of small businesses and workshops.
He's supposed to have been born in number 28. Ah, here it is. His rather stocky older brother was known as Botticello, which means the barrel. So when young Alessandro came along, he became known as the little barrel, Botticelli. And blessed are they who endure life with a silly name.
The family were not wealthy. His father was a tanner, but Little Barrel had talent. And talented people very soon came to the attention of the de facto rulers of the city, brothers Lorenzo and Giuliano Medici. Botticelli's first big commission was an altarpiece for this church, Santa Maria Novella, and it tells us a great deal about the kind of circles the young painter was moving in. Today, the painting hangs in the Uffizi.
First thing to point out is Little Barrel himself. This is thought to be a self-portrait on the right-hand side of the picture, but it's not the only likeness we see here.
The crowd is peppered with portraits of notable Medici family members, past and present, including the current generation, Giuliano and his brother Lorenzo.
This one picture is a snapshot of Botticelli's world. It's a tribute to the power of the Medici and a reminder that Botticelli was right in the midst of things.
Shortly after this painting was finished, the young Sandro Botticelli was caught up in a notorious chapter in Florentine history. A bloody coup, known as the Pazzi Conspiracy, attempted to topple the ruling Medici clan.
In 1478, some of their rivals for control of the city, members of the Pazzi banking family, in cahoots with the Pope, Sixtus IV, tried to put an end to Medici rule and indeed to the Medici themselves.
During Sunday Mass in the cathedral, the brothers were set upon. Giuliano was stabbed to death, but Lorenzo, though wounded, managed to escape. Medici supporters quickly rallied round Lorenzo, and it became clear that the plot had failed.
The rest of the day was an orgy of violence, as members of the Pazzi faction were defenestrated from the windows up here or lynched in the piazza down here. The general uprising against Medici rule that the Pazzi had expected failed to materialize, because it seems that the ordinary citizens of Florence, the popolani, were quite content with Medici rule. They certainly weren't in the mood to be pushed around by a bunch of bankers.
Pope Sixtus, who had been one of the instigators of the plot, was furious, and for 3 years he tried everything he could think of to defeat Lorenzo. But in the end, a truce was negotiated.
And this is where Botticelli comes back into the story to help save the day. As a peace offering, the Medici arranged for 3 of the greatest artists from Florence, by then recognized as the pinnacle of artistic excellence in Italy, to go to Rome and work for the Pope. And one of them was Sandro Botticelli.
In July 1481, accompanied by 2 other artists and their retinue, Botticelli left his home city for the journey to Rome.
In 1918, Gwendolyn and Margaret Davis were also making a journey, returning home to Wales at the end of the First World War. In the battlefields of France, they had discussed how they could use their fortune to benefit the community they had grown up in. And in 1920, they bought this house, Greginog Hall in Powys, central Wales.
They had a grand plan for the house, to establish an arts and cultural centre for Wales, where they could display their ever-expanding art collection. But ultimately, Greginog became their home. Good morning.
Hello, Emma. How lovely to meet you.
Lovely to
Art historian Anne Sumner has studied the Davis sisters and knows Greginog well. The sisters' art collection has now gone to the Cardiff Museum and elsewhere. But there is one very significant picture still in the house. A small watercolour called The Algerian by Hercules Brabazon.
So this is where it all began. This is the very first work of art that the sisters bought. This was purchased by Margaret in 1906. And it's quite extraordinary, really, that they move on to make such major acquisitions so quickly. 1908, they buy their first major Turners, spending over £13,000 on 2 of them. And by 1912, thinking about major Impressionist purchases.
Monet became a favourite. They bought several of his views of Venice, a city they loved. Their confidence was bolstered by their ability to visit the world's greatest art collections. They were extremely well-travelled and recorded everything in beautifully illustrated journals.
Now this one is from 1909, and there's a page here I thought you'd be particularly interested in. Botticelli here. So this is actually describing an evening drive out of Florence and up to Fiesole, one of her favourite places. And she actually has stuck in here one of the olive branches from the trees.
Having just seen Botticelli's painting of spring, the Primavera, in the Uffizi, Gwendolen imagines the painter's first glimpse of his muse.
Was it not on this same hill that Botticelli saw her, coming through the orange groves that hung around Lorenzo's villa, and climbing up some toilsome steep, our souls, together with the soul of silent things, went out to meet the spring?
So certainly not understated.
Certainly not.
When they eventually settled at Graignogh Hall, their most successful cultural enterprise was a festival of music and poetry, which involved a major revamp of the billiard room.
One of the key things for them was to have music here, and they created this wonderful space which became so famous for the Graignogh Festival. You have people like Gustav Holst here, Adrian Bolt, and the Impressionist paintings that the Davies sisters collected were actually hanging on the walls here. So it must have been a very, very special experience for people who came.
As well as superstars from the world of contemporary classical music, the festival photo album shows a diverse range of supporters. The Prime Minister, Stanley Baldwin, George Bernard Shaw, and even comedian Joyce Grenfell.
They really enjoyed themselves. You know, you think about them travelling when they were young, playing tennis in Monte Carlo, visiting art galleries. We think about them living in rural Montgomeryshire, which of course they did, but they had a flat in London. And I think they were extraordinary, real visionaries who were actually probably very exciting people to meet in a way. In their quiet manner, they had this extraordinary vision for Wales.
In the late summer of 1481, Sandro Botticelli and his companions arrived in Rome. The delighted Pope Sixtus set them to work at St. Peter's, decorating the walls of his newly built ceremonial chapel, the Capella Magna. Named after Pope Sixtus, it's better known to us today as the Sistine Chapel, and is now one of the most popular tourist destinations on Earth. 25 years after the Florentine masters frescoed the walls, Michelangelo was commissioned to fresco the ceiling. And ever since, everyone who visits the chapel looks straight up at the roof and leaves with a stiff neck. But by overlooking Botticelli's frescoes, they're missing a treat.
I think this was a pivotal moment in Botticelli's career. He'd never really travelled far from Florence before, and now he found himself packed off to Rome, the centre of the civilised world, working for the most powerful man in Christendom.
Rome changed Botticelli. In the city, he saw for the first time the remains of the classical past and began to incorporate them in his paintings. But it was also an endorsement of his status. He brought his own mastery of colour and line to the frescoes, and they are significantly more successful than those of his companions.
For me, Botticelli's Sistine Chapel frescoes are one of the great tragedies of art history, because I think they're his best pictures. But of course, everybody goes in and looks straight up at Michelangelo's ceiling. But if you spend time looking at some of the details of Botticelli's frescoes, you get to see just what a unique artist he really was.
This is the Temptation of Moses. Sixtus demanded his artists use the rather old-fashioned device of showing lots of different episodes from the same story in one painting. But what saves it is Botticelli's vivid storytelling.
Look at this fellow down here on the bottom right. He's one of the Hebrews who's been attacked by an Egyptian, who Moses later kills, but the expression on his face is so vivid and realistic. You really get a sense that he was unjustly attacked, and you can see him smarting from the wound on his head. It's fantastically painted.
My favourite of the three frescoes is this one, The Temptations of Christ. Here's the devil tempting a fasting Jesus to turn the stones into bread and feed himself. I love the traditional medieval portrayal of Satan in a monk's cowl with talons for feet. After Jesus rejects the final temptation, Satan is cast down from the mountain heights. And I can't help wondering if Botticelli was inspired by memories of the Pazzi conspirators being thrown out of the windows in Florence.
To make viewers think that the picture is actually a real and eternal story, Botticelli introduces a supporting range of characters of contemporary figures, faces of recognizably real people. Some are young and some are old, some are beautiful and some are not.
I also like the fact that they are full of prototypes for our picture back in Cardiff. Lots of classic Botticelli beauties with their slightly tilted heads.
Of course, he had great technical skill, but he also had a rare ability to breathe a special sense of life into his subjects, and he uses that to connect with his audiences on an emotional level as well as a visual one. It's the emotional power of Botticelli's faces and gazes that allow us to feel and dream our way into another world.
Our painting was bequeathed to the National Museum of Wales by Gwendolyn Davis in 1952, along with many other important works of art. But the significance of this gift stretched far beyond the boost it gave to the gallery's collection. It was to play an important part in Cardiff's battle to become capital of Wales, because surprisingly, until 1955, Wales had no capital.
The reason why Wales didn't have a capital is because constitutionally Wales didn't exist. After the Acts of Union in the 16th century, Wales is part of England, administratively, legally, educationally, etc. But during the 19th century, and particularly the end of the 19th century, there is this process and development which is often called the national revival, where Wales starts to have a much stronger sense of its distinctiveness and separateness and difference from England, and also to start developing its own, I'd like a proto-state, if you like, its own national trappings. It has a national museum, a national library, etc.
As part of Cardiff's development as a capital city in waiting, the area known as Cathays Park on the northern edge of the city centre was chosen to be the site of an ambitious complex of civic buildings. A new town hall, law courts, and a temple of health were to be built in a unified style with broad avenues and green open spaces. The National Museum was an important part of the plan.
All the buildings in the Civic Centre, as it was originally envisaged, were to be of the same stone, of Portland stone, to give that sense of unity to it, and indeed many people have recalled it as sort of like a white city. What you can see here is what many would agree is one of the finest civic centres in Britain, if not in the world. And that's part of Cardiff's push to be recognised as, to use the words of the time, the metropolis of Wales.
The ambitious plan to create a civic complex worthy of a capital city finally paid off in 1955, when Cardiff beat off competition from Carnarvon and Aberystwyth to become capital of Wales. And it's great to think our painting played a tiny part in that result.
Back in London, I visited Simon's studio on a day of high excitement. It's results day. Peter Klein has confirmed that the panel is made of poplar, in keeping with Renaissance practice. The X-ray and infrared scans have also arrived, and I'm pleased to say they support all our earlier theories.
The X-ray shows missing bits of paint, large black areas. So what you're looking at there, Bendor, is the faked layer of overpaint.
Yeah.
And you can see it's confirmed on the X-ray here, where there are large areas missing. And then you can see the smeary layer that covers some of the cracks.
Right.
And as you look closely here, you'll begin to see it all.
Okay, so I can imagine that someone has come along to this picture in the past, substantial damage in the background, and they thought, let's just cover the whole thing up.
The other interesting thing, if you look closely, you'll see that there is a green layer underneath the flesh tones.
It's quite unnerving when you look at it up close, because you don't expect to see green flesh.
This pale grey-green is the complementary colour to flesh tones, and was used as a ground layer by artists painting in egg tempera to give an added depth and realism to the skin in a portrait. This was a technique Botticelli employed. You can see it peeping up from beneath the pink.
Yes.
And that's exactly what you would expect to see for a painting from Botticelli's workshop.
Yes,
How
indeed.
interesting.
Yes.
The X-ray had one final surprise for us. The faint outline of a face that had been drawn on the panel before the painting was begun. It looks like a Botticelli drawing, doesn't it?
It's got all that Christmas and single line drawing, yeah.
And it bears no relation to the main composition of the picture. It's just a tiny little doodle.
Yeah.
And just to think that we're the first people to see that
Marvellous, isn't it?
in
Yeah.
500 years.
Yeah, I know. But anyway, let's go on to the infrared.
The infrared scan will enable us to have a look at the preparatory underdrawing and those clumsy fingers.
So you can see that some of the fingers have been extended, changed shape. You can see the thumb goes underneath the pomegranate.
Oh, yes.
There's a rather nice bump of the thumb.
Yes, there's a whole different shape of the thumb.
Yeah.
Whereas on the picture at the moment, it looks rather like a cocktail sausage. There's no
Yes.
definition to it at all.
No.
Armed with these insights, and with a new confidence that we were on the right track, it was time for the swabs to come out. In consultation with Adam, Cardiff's conservator, we have agreed to leave the later arch and the background with its fake cracks in place, and concentrate on removing old varnish and overpaint from the figures. Seeing the picture again did nothing to help with my scopophilia. She's as beautiful as ever. You can see the pinks coming through.
Yeah. It's that much more subtle pink as well.
At the start of his career, Botticelli would have used egg as a binding medium for his paint. But by the 1480s, when we think this picture was made, painters in Florence were beginning to paint using oil. For a time, Botticelli used the two techniques together, and there is evidence of both in this picture.
What we're looking at here is a lot of retouching, but the main body of the painting is definitely painted with tempera.
It's all good, it's all good. It's just getting better and better, this picture. Look at the corner of that lip. It's good. You're bringing a picture which is 540 years old back to life. Isn't that something? I don't know if it's the fumes from this. I'm feeling quite emotional.
I love my job. This is a fantastic example of how well something comes back to life again.
With the cleaning progressing so well, I'm going to turn my attention to the painting's provenance. In 1920, the picture was sold to the Davis sisters as a Botticelli by the same man who had so presciently urged them to buy Impressionist works by the likes of Monet and Cézanne. A painter and art dealer called Hugh Blaker, the brother of the sisters' governess. So where did a small-time dealer like Blaker get hold of a Botticelli? Blaker first bought the picture at Christie's in 1915. Madonna and Child, the Virgin, in red and green robes before a semicircular archway. But what's interesting is that it wasn't catalogued as by Botticelli, but by School of Botticelli, which means definitely not the man himself. He paid just £105 for it. So it seems Blaker might have bought himself what we call in the art trade a bit of a sleeper. Now, Blaker lost little time in declaring the picture to be by Botticelli himself, and I've come across a fascinating tale about how he tried to turn a rapid profit. At the time, the big money for European Old Master paintings was being paid in America, and Blaker decided to send his Botticelli to New York to see if he could find a buyer, and he wrote a letter promoting the picture. Now, I used to be an art dealer, but even I would shudder at writing a letter as oleaginous as this. It's really quite something. Dear Sir, may I call your attention to the superb picture, The Madonna and Child, by Sandro Botticelli. This is the only Botticelli for sale in the world. The price, exceedingly moderate considering the importance of the picture, is £16,000. No mention is made here of the fact that Blaker had bought the picture just 6 months earlier for £105. One possible buyer was the noted art dealer Joseph Devine. Now, Devine was interested, but first he wanted to seek the opinion of the world's leading scholar of Renaissance art, Bernard Berenson. Bernard Berenson is a legend in the history of art connoisseurship, and knowing that he had passed judgment on this very painting gives me goosebumps. As a young man, Berenson had a remarkable talent for history and languages and graduated from Harvard University in 1885, quickly becoming one of the most respected scholars of the Italian Renaissance. He made many trips to study art in Italy, paid for by wealthy American collectors, and in 1900 he moved permanently to this ancient farmhouse in the hills outside Florence, the Villa Itati. Kenneth Clark, who worked with him in the 1930s, said, "He was just what the great American middlebrow public was looking for, a sage." So, what about Berenson's reply to Devine's inquiry? What was the judgment of the 20th century's most learned Renaissance scholar on the Cardiff Madonna? This is Bernard Berenson's photographic archive.
This was sent by Devine and Co. from New York in June 1917. And we've got here the corresponding letter. It says, "We enclose you a photograph of a Madonna and Child, about which we should be very glad to have your views as to attribution and value, etc., etc." We've got here Berenson's reply from the Devine archive in New York. It says, "Dear Mrs. Devine, in answer of yours, June 28th, I want to say the photograph of a very pretty Madonna from the studio of Botticelli. Should you care to buy it, I would advise you to go up to $5,000 for it." Well, that's significantly more than the £105 that Blake had paid for it in 1915. So how does this move the game on? Well, someone as respected as Bernard Berenson said in 1917 that our painting was certainly from the studio Botticelli. He was judging it from a sepia photograph, but there was something about the quality, perhaps of the face, that caught his eye.
All very positive, you'd think. But unfortunately, Berenson's reputation has suffered from his close involvement with Joseph Devine. Devine paid Berenson as much as 30% of the sale price of works on which he had passed judgment. This was a colossal incentive for Berenson to authenticate a painting, and led to criticism that his opinion could be bought. In the case of our painting, whether he stood to gain or not, in 1917 he felt it was a Botticelli studio production, not by a later follower, and that's encouraging progress. But it's not the end of the story. 35 years later, Berenson was presented with the picture again. In 1952, when the National Museum of Wales was given the painting, they asked Bernard Berenson again for his opinion on who painted it. He replied, saying that he was acquainted with the picture since 1917. But now he goes on to say that the face of the Virgin and the head of the Child may have been done by Botticelli himself. So that would suggest something of an upgrade in the attribution. Now today, art historians still view Berenson's connoisseurship with great suspicion. But I have to say, by this point, he'd ended his relationship with Devine, and he wasn't involved in the art market at all. So what we're getting here is his purely academic opinion. Naturally, because I agree with him, I think he's a great sage and a tremendous connoisseur. Our quest to understand our picture is beginning to hinge on the question of whether it's by Botticelli himself, or just came from his studio. So I'm going to visit the National Gallery in London, who have some of the very finest authenticated works by Botticelli in the UK. One of their best is Venus and Mars, and I asked Caroline Campbell to walk us through the picture.
First of all, what's going on here? Why does this little Cupid have a huge helmet on his head? Is that supposed to be there?
Well, it's one of the most comic pictures. I think it's such a great representation of how, you know, men and women might feel after love. The god of war, Mars, has lost all his armour and he's so seduced by the goddess Venus. He has fallen asleep in what Botticelli's contemporaries called very decorously the little sleep that happened after lovemaking.
Ah, right, okay.
He can't be woken up by the conch shell blown in his ear. It's just a marvellous painting of the power of love, I think.
And of course, what makes the picture work so well is the beauty of his technique. When you look at, say, the Venus's face, what is it about the technique of the painting here that convinces you this is an autographed Botticelli head?
Well, Botticelli trained as a painter in tempera, and that means you had to be incredibly precise, and that any mark you made, you had to be sure it was right. And if you look at her lovely nose, her eyes, it's that combination of precision. And I think just also not just the economy, but the elegance of it is something which for me is very much Botticelli. All the figures are in proportion together. What I think Botticelli is so brilliant at are these outlines, this sense of these really pure forms. They can be translated into any other medium, and that's what made him such an effective master of a workshop, because you could easily take these ideas, and even somebody who wasn't very good could make something that looked very like Botticelli.
Right.
But everything that came out under his workshop's name, he would have had some sort of control over.
To get an idea of how the practice of an artist's workshop today compares to Renaissance Florence, I've come to the industrial hinterland of East London, where Gavin Turk has a busy studio. Gavin's art is concerned with issues of authorship and often plays on his own image.
I think that the first moment I started employing people was more or less when I had my first exhibition.
The assistants working in Botticelli's studio would have been aspiring artists themselves, but seeing Gavin's assistants going through the mundane business of testing power tools, I wondered if that was still the case today.
Yeah, I think most of the people who work here in my studio actually are artists themselves, and when they're not working here, they're working on their own program and their own projects. You know, I think that the idea of working with other people to make my art is almost like part of the art. I mean, you know, I think that I really, for me, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter who makes the art, as long as the art is the art that I think I want it to be. And so some people are going to be much better at doing things, possibly than I am. And I'm also going to be probably good at doing some things that other people aren't. But I certainly want to work with the best possible people to make things to look the best way.
As well as his manipulations of his own image, Gavin has a bit of a thing for eggs and is preparing a 2-ton bronze one for an upcoming exhibition.
I've made about 600 pieces now that have got eggs in them. I'm kind of fairly obsessed with eggs.
So with a piece like this, how much of it would you have kind of made with your own hands, and how much has been made by workshop assistants?
I've really not touched this sculpture very much, although I have had a hand in some sanding at some point.
And how aware do you think the people who buy your art are of how collaborative the process is?
I think that people who buy art are very varied in terms of their actual knowledge or experience of the process of making art. I think that some of them live in the mindset that the artist has literally coveted and made and done everything that they see before them. And then obviously there's the other side of it where, you know, some collectors really are very kind of aware that it's a very kind of like distant touch.
So it would seem nothing much has changed since Botticelli's studio was turning out Madonnas in the 15th century. As long as there's a demand for beautiful things, the buyers don't ask too many questions.
So, Gavin Turk, creative genius or quality control at the end of the process?
Oh, definitely both. Creative genius and quality controller.
If our Madonna is by Botticelli, it would have been painted in the 1480s, after he returned from Rome, when his workshop was one of the busiest in Florence. But the last years of the 15th century were a restless time in the city. In 1492, Botticelli's patron, Lorenzo de' Medici, died at the young age of 43. By his deathbed were his favourite painter, Michelangelo, and a Dominican friar who administered the last rites, Girolamo Savonarola. It is said that at the moment of Lorenzo's death, the Duomo was struck by lightning. There was a mood of superstitious foreboding, and the charismatic monk Savonarola became famous by playing on these fears.
People were convinced that the world would end in 1500. The city was gripped by guilt and remorse, and they were whipped up into a fervour by Savonarola, who preached fiery sermons of repentance from his pulpit in the Duomo.
Botticelli, who had always had a religious streak, fell heavily under his spell. Under Savonarola's influence, the Florentines finally turned against the Medici, who were deposed and banished. Savonarola took hold of their hearts and minds, vowing that if they rejected their love of earthly treasures, Florence would become the New Jerusalem.
As part of his religious showmanship, Savonarola organised giant conflagrations here in the Piazza della Signoria, the famous bonfires of the vanities, and onto these were cast the worthless trinkets of a society gone rotten.
The very foundations of Renaissance culture were under attack. Un-Christian pictures that portrayed ancient, pagan, Greek and Roman subjects like Botticelli's Birth of Venus were condemned. Botticelli is said to have thrown some of his own works into the flames. This dark mood changed Botticelli's art. His pictures became mysterious and apocalyptic, like the mystic crucifixion. In the background, Florence is threatened by the fires of hell as burning torches rain from the sky. But Savonarola's grip on the city was brief. Florence's ruling classes resented his religious tyranny, and in 1498 he was arrested, tried, and burnt at the stake here in the piazza where Botticelli had thrown his own pictures on the bonfire of the vanities. The city's merchants and bankers got back into the business of making money again. Her artists once more felt able to seek inspiration from classical mythology. The Renaissance was about to achieve its greatest triumphs.
It seems Botticelli, though, never recovered. Very little work survives from his last years, and it's said that he became a beggar and survived on handouts. I prefer to remember him as the artistic genius who made magical paintings of beautiful people.
But perhaps I'm just a hopeless scopophiliac. Simon has now completed the work on the painting, and I've decided there is no cure for what ails me. I'm every bit as besotted by the beauty of our Madonna as I was when I first saw her.
What do you think?
I'm actually speechless. Normally I'm speechless when you give me the bill, but this is just knockout, isn't it?
It works, doesn't it?
It works. That's it, actually. That's the word. It works. And the modelling, the flesh tones, the subtlety of the contours of the face.
Yeah.
That's what Botticelli does, isn't it?
Yeah, this is exactly what it is. I particularly love those reflections in the dark side of the face, which give that 3 dimensions to the whole object.
Oh, there are so many good bits, aren't there? Oh, we can see them now for the first time in centuries.
The restoration has transformed the painting. It's as if a veil has been lifted, and the purity of the Madonna's countenance is shining through once more. The colour is back in the chubby cheeks of the Christ child, and even the pomegranate has a new succulence. The National Gallery are a leading authority on Botticelli in the UK. But they have a policy of not commenting on works that are not in their collection. So we've devised a plan B. There is, in Yale, in America, Larry Cantor, the director of the Yale Museum of Art, is widely regarded as a world-leading Botticelli specialist, and we can't show him the picture because he's based in the States, but we're going to send him a dossier and images and see what he says. The work Simon has done has brought this painting back to life, and certainly to see the faces cleaned and restored gives me great hope that Botticelli himself played some part in its creation. I've put together all the results of our labours, the scientific investigations, and the various records of the picture's provenance, and I'm emailing it to Lawrence Cantor in the States to get his opinion.
The sun was shining when we returned the painting to Cardiff to the National Museum of Wales. A good turnout of staff and friends of the gallery had come to see the results of the restoration.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here. This is a very special painting. It seems to have particularly had quite a profound effect on Bendor, and I don't know that I've ever known him to be so in love with a painting. Is that fair to say?
I think it probably is fair to say. Shall we show everybody why?
Yes. Let's reveal.
This is the oldest painting we've ever worked on. And Simon took, what, 3 months, 4 months?
It felt like 10 years. And she's sorely missed, yeah. I used to long going in and having breakfast with her in the morning.
We have been able to send all the images and all the information, all the evidence we've gathered to a world-renowned Botticelli expert who's called Larry Cantor, Lawrence Cantor. He's the chief curator at the Yale Art Gallery in the United States. And I have here in my pocket an email. He says, clearly, this painting came from Botticelli's studio. Probably, Botticelli himself is responsible for more than a bit of it. A great deal more study is needed to solve the riddles of how much, what parts, why, and when. For Botticelli, all these are essential questions to be answered. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We're quite pleased with that, given the circumstances and the condition of the picture.
It's good to know that far from being an unimportant copy, the Cardiff Madonna may well be the picture Gwendolyn Davies thought it was. Painted in Botticelli's workshop, with parts of it done by Botticelli himself.
So this is a story to be continued, but there's much more that colleagues like Adam can do here at Cardiff to take the story onto the next level. I think she's looking absolutely beautiful, and it's for you to judge, really, whether you think it's all by Botticelli or a workshop piece. I know what I think. And I think it's a great image, and I hope you all enjoy having it on the walls here in Cardiff.
We're delighted. In the time I've been here, we haven't been able to display this painting. I think it's such a dramatic change once we can remove all the horrible old varnish and all the horrible old restoration, and we're very pleased.
There's a question mark over another painting bequeathed by the Davies sisters to Cardiff. Bought as an El Greco, it's now thought to be a workshop copy.